Class. Welcome to Module 5. As you can see already, you're starting to see how sociology looks at health and illness and medicine. And you can see that we don't necessarily define it in the same manner, or we look at the causes that come into place. So how do you define illness? Does it match with how society defines it? And what's illness? And is it affected by culture? Well, you already know some of those answers just by coming to week 5 of this class. So you can see the social construction coming into place. Now think about social construction. If you've taken other sociology classes, you know that there are so many things that are socially constructed. Race, gender, how we are to behave in those situations, even the social construction of education, what works, what happens with school, and why you sit in rows, and what is behavior, and there's a big latent function of school. And so you're breaking the norm when you're doing something like an online class from the old situation and how to follow it. And as an instructor, sometimes I stick to those old norms because you can see in our online classes that I follow similar criteria as in the classroom, but give you some more reach out to other sources for explanations for your learning. But social construction of illness really looks at us putting some theories into place. So this particular chapter talks about some of those theories, and the most important one is the sick role. So I'm going to pop over to the PowerPoints, give you a quick review in there, and you're going to find that this module will focus on the chapter, and we'll focus on the information in the chapter, and there'll be very little for you to do outside of that with this particular module. So does illness have social meanings? As we start to explore what goes on within that process. Does it have a place? Does it mean something in society? And how do we put that into place? So what are we looking at here? The concept of illness changes over time, just like other things that are socially constructed. So the expectations of gender roles have changed over time. You can see that in the 1950s, the idea was a woman stayed home, took care of the family. It was not that 100 years before. We can see the changing roles that occur in other places. We can definitely see that in society. Think about people with mental illness. In the 1700s, sometimes they were thought of as talking in tongues and amazing information coming out of that. Other times they were locked away and hidden from society. We define that in the process. So we see this concept of illness changes over time, and we can see that illness was a deserved punishment. We definitely see this when we look at disability on people, that it's the sins of the father visited on the sins of the children and grandchildren coming into place, that it's this deserved punishment. And then we see this view change to illness as a result of unhealthy behaviors. And we see the temperance movement tied to this. So poverty and all of that are unhealthy behaviors, and we want to cure that, and we want to stop the use of alcohol, before we even have that scientific understanding. But a lot of things can be blamed on the individual. So across time, powerless people are still often blamed for illness. And this is something when you think about major epidemics, like the beginning of the HIV epidemic. The first diagnosis of HIV was actually written in a diary of a Danish physician as she was going through the process in Africa, but we blamed it on the Haitians, and we blamed it on the gays, and we could put a problem into place on blaming it on a particular society. So you can see the social influences come in here. Well, there's two different approaches when we look at understanding illness. And it's interesting teaching disabilities, which I don't normally do, at the same time I'm teaching this course. Usually they're an opposite. So this is same information that we talk about, models of this approach to illness, or models to the approach of looking at disability. Now, we go in a great deal more than we do in this class, but you can see the medical model is the dominant conception of illness in the world, that how it comes into place and how we're defined by our diseases. It's interesting, after working in a hospital for 15 years, patients were defined by the diagnosis that came in. And that's how they were treated. And they would miss major, major things that were going on in their life because they didn't use that sociological model. The sociological model is to look at the social forces that affect healthcare and health, and how you come into place, and why people make those decisions. So as we look at the difference here, it's really important to compare these across the board. The difference between the illness model of labeling and education and the social model of looking at the moral consequences that come into place, the conditions of behavior, the fact that people in poverty are more likely to have more illness, they will live in less safe conditions, there will be children exposed to less food in the home, or homes that are not as well kept and may have lead paint, and we see that process. And so there's a significant difference that come into place. But medicine as an institution, we can see significant things coming into place as far as world and the culture of doctors, and that economic, social, and political underpinnings of the world. There's so much to talk about here when we start thinking about medicine as an institution. So as we look at our own culture now, and we have a healthcare system that is definitely driven by this economic, social, and political underpinnings of the world. The fight to eliminate the Affordable Care Act in the process, which was fought for years to get into place, of a semi-national healthcare plan. We can see this back and forth, that it drives the institution. Or what's really interesting as we look at this, and I'm going to try to find a link for you on it, on the current shortage of IV solution and IV bags that is affecting the entire medical system in the United States, because our high dependence on its construction, which was done in Puerto Rico, which was damaged by the hurricane and is not back up and running. And what do we do with these things? We can see the economic, the social, all of those as we start looking at this medical institution. So medicine as an institution of social control, how does it define your life? Look at this at the greater society. And one of the first steps of the process is medicalization. Now, medicalization is identifying a condition as a medical problem that requires a medical solution. Great example of medicalization is the medicalization of women. In the past, women were part of their life, but now we've defined moving through segments of life as medical process. So when a woman starts her menses, that move to that medicalization, how do we treat that? What comes into place? We can see all of the tie going through her life, and as she leaves her menses, then we have the issue of women are more tied to going to the doctor. They're involved, and then we watch the birth process, and then we look at menopause now being medicalized. A great example is the example of ADHD. And as we define it as a problem in the classroom, then that is being diagnosed at higher and higher levels, and we medicate children at higher and higher levels. So two things that I'm going to have you look at in this particular module are the medicalization of women and the medicalization of ADHD. Now, medicalization can lead to some important things. So the medicalization of women has improved women's health significantly, but it's also tied them to the increased power of doctors and the increased power of social authority over their body. You can see the impact of the medicalization of ADHD as well. We can treat children, we can deal with that, but then we over-treat and we create a medical crisis that comes into place. So things to think about as you look at these consequences that come into place. And you'll see in the parts of the PowerPoint that I'm not touching on, it gives you those thoughts as what are the benefits that come into place, what are the values as you start to examine them. So other things to consider are the big change in genetic research. Now, even since this book has been written, so much more has increased, and we found some real look at the shift towards looking at genes, and even the treatment of cancer is really exciting because now we can treat based on your own genes, and it's more successful. Very expensive, but more successful when we're treating some things. But it also then has some effect when we have our background checked. Are we more likely to get Alzheimer's? Does it then affect, by knowing that, what we pay for our insurance and how we're treated by that situation, and is it protective? And we can see that related to the gene related to breast cancer for women and the pre-treatment of the removal of breast tissue being put into place to protect someone who has that BRCA gene into place. And the concern related to that. So we'll see more change and tied to the social institution related to this genetic research. Finally, when we look at this, we look at the theories that come in place. Now, Talcott Parsons was writing in the 1950s. He is very powerful at looking at the sick role and how it comes into place. And I want you to understand the sick role at a deeper level that comes than our book necessarily gets to. So I've given you some additional information. The sick role puts what the society expects regarding sickness, how sickness should be viewed and how people should behave. And so we see these processes coming forth. So let me pop back over to your information over here and slide this over, and you'll see that I've given you a great deal more on the sick role to look at and to understand the medicalization that occurs within the process. Talcott Parsons basically says there's 4 steps that come into place for a sick person, and the first is someone who's sick is exempted from that normal social role. They are not responsible for his or her condition, and they should try to get well. So this is seeking medical help, and it puts them in that process. And they should seek technical and competent help and cooperate with a physician. So they become the good patient that comes into place. And this is the role that comes in place. And this is the concept that both the physician and the patient are expected to work together for that benefit. And there is a balance in that relationship that is unhealthy balance, that the doctor holds the great power within that. Now, what's interesting is we see society changing and things like the internet and the availability to get information, the balance of power we will talk about later on as we look at doctors and their process is not the same as what it used to be. So I've given you a brief to get started with your look at this particular process. Now, you will find that I've given you a link to look more at the medicalization of women. And this is an absolutely great article, and it's very long here, on the medicalization of ADHD. Which is the second one. So I'm only asking you to explore it and see what some of those social theories, I thought I'd show you the chapters in this, but just some information. And for those of you who are thinking about papers, you can see that this is a good reference source if you were thinking about writing your paper on ADHD. In that process. But for anyone who works with children who are often diagnosed with this, it gives you that background information. As you can see, then the information on the sick roll is also here, and I'm asking you to view a quick little, in fact, this is less than 2 minute, I believe this. I apologize. It's just a more in-depth look at the sick roll. It's not a video. The following is a quick, less than 2 minute video on labeling theory and just giving you some ideas. With that said, I hope you have a great week, and I'll look forward to your discussions on this particular topic, and we'll see how things go. With that said, make sure that you're asking questions and that you're contacting me with any of those. But have a great day.